My best friend's ex left her with a diabetic infant, paid zero child support for 5 years, then showed up with his infertile wife who wanted the child as a replacement and called her a responsibility they were willing to take on. I need to write this out because I've been going over it in my head for 3 days and I still can't believe what happened at my front door last Saturday. My name isn't important, but I'm a 31-year-old woman, and my best friend Carla, 31F, and I have known each other since we were in 7th grade. We went to the same middle school, same high school, and then ended up at the same university by complete coincidence because we had actually picked different programs. She was doing business administration and I was doing biology, and somehow we ended up in the same off-campus housing lottery and got placed in the same building. That felt like the universe confirming something we already knew. I say all of this because people are going to read what I'm about to write and wonder if Carla and I have some weird codependent thing going on. We don't. We just happen to be the kind of friends who actually show up for each other, which apparently is unusual enough that people find it hard to believe. Now, about Philip, 35M. He and Carla started dating in their 2nd year of university. He was well liked, had a good group of friends, played recreational soccer on weekends, and seemed like the kind of person who had his life together. Their relationship lasted about 4 years. By the time Carla was 26, they were living together in a 1-bedroom apartment near the university district, and she got pregnant. Neither of them had planned it, but Carla decided to keep the baby, and Philip said he was on board. Their daughter Nora was born when Carla was 27. I was in the delivery room. I cut the cord because Philip said hospitals made him uncomfortable and he stepped out right before the final stage of labor. That should have told us everything. For the first 8 weeks after Nora was born, Philip came home later and later. He said it was work. Carla was on maternity leave, barely sleeping, managing a newborn with a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes that came 2 months after Nora's birth when she had a seizure in the middle of the night. Managing a diabetic infant is not a small thing. It means blood sugar checks every few hours, learning how to use a continuous glucose monitor on a baby, understanding how to adjust feeds based on readings, and spending a lot of time on the phone with pediatric endocrinologists. Carla learned all of it. Philip learned none of it. He left when Nora was 4 months old. He didn't have another woman, as far as anyone knew at the time. He just said he hadn't signed up for this level of stress and that he needed space. He moved in with a friend from his soccer team and went almost completely silent. No child support. No visits. One text on Nora's first birthday that just said happy birthday to the little one and then nothing again for another full year. Carla went back to work at a restaurant 6 weeks after Philip left because she had no other choice. Her parents are in another country and were not in a position to help financially. She worked doubles on weekends and I would stay with Nora on those days, learning the glucose monitor routine, figuring out what to feed her and when. This went on for about a year. Now, about my situation. My grandmother left me a trust fund when I passed away. I want to be straightforward about this because people tend to make assumptions. I did not grow up wealthy in the way people imagine. My grandmother was a careful woman who saved her entire life and she left what she had to me specifically because, as she put it in the letter attached to the will, she trusted me not to be stupid with it. I've kept that promise. I finished my PhD in molecular biology last year. I had research scholarships through most of it. I lived simply. 2 years ago, I bought a house in a quiet neighborhood called Cedarfield, about 20 minutes from the university. It's a 3-bedroom house with a yard. I offered Carla and Nora the 2nd bedroom. Not as charity, not as a loan. I told Carla directly that I was paying the mortgage regardless and the room was either going to sit empty or have 2 people I actually liked living in it. She moved in 3 weeks later. After she moved in, Carla was able to drop one of her 2 jobs and re-enroll in her business program part-time. Nora, who is now 5, started at a small private school nearby that has a nurse on staff who is trained in pediatric diabetes management, which is not something every school has. I pay the tuition. Carla covers her own expenses and contributes to groceries. We split the household tasks based on who is home and when. I'm saying all of this to paint a clear picture before I get to last Saturday. At around 11 in the morning, I heard a knock at the door. Carla was at the library studying for her accounting exam. Nora was in the backyard. I opened the door and Philip was standing there. He was not alone. He had a woman with him who I later found out was his wife, Sandra. He also had his parents, who I recognized from photos, and 2 other people I didn't know. I hadn't seen Philip in person since the month before he left. That was nearly 5 years ago. He started talking immediately. He said he had done a lot of work on himself, that he had built a stable life, that he and Sandra owned a home in a suburb called Pinecrest, and that he thought it was time for him to be part of Nora's life. He said Nora deserved to know her father and her grandparents on his side. His mother started talking about family heritage and how children need roots. Sandra said almost nothing for the first few minutes. She kept looking past me toward the backyard where Nora was playing. At one point she said that they had plenty of space at their house and that they were more than ready to take on the responsibility, and she used that phrase, take on the responsibility, in the same tone you might use when talking about adopting a dog. I told him Carla wasn't home. Philip said it didn't matter, that he was Nora's father and he had rights. His father nodded. I looked at this group of 6 people standing on my porch and I laughed. Not a short laugh. A full, genuine laugh, the kind that happens when something is so far from what you expected that your body doesn't know what else to do. Then I told Philip that he had 5 years of unpaid child support, 5 years of medical costs for a diabetic child, 5 years of school fees, and 5 years of not a single phone call, and that if he wanted to take this to court, he should talk to a lawyer first so the lawyer could explain what judges think of parents who disappear for 5 years and then show up with a posse. I told Sandra specifically that Nora was not available for placement. I closed the door. I am posting this because Carla came home 2 hours later and I had to tell her what happened, and now we're trying to figure out what to do next. I don't know if Philip actually files anything. I don't know if this was a bluff. But I have 5 years of receipts, and so does Carla. Update 1: a lot happened. I'll try to be organized about it. The day after I posted, Carla called a family lawyer named Patricia who a friend from her program had used during a custody dispute a couple of years back. Patricia took a look at everything Carla had, the years of no contact, the zero child support, the medical documentation for Nora, and told Carla that Philip was in a very weak position if he chose to file. He filed anyway. 2 weeks after he showed up at my door, Carla received paperwork. Philip was requesting regular visitation and the possibility of shared custody, citing that he was now financially stable and that Carla's living arrangement, specifically the fact that she and Nora were living in my home, was proof that she couldn't support herself or Nora independently. That last part is what got people in the comments when I shared it, and honestly it got me too. His argument, as Patricia explained it, was that Carla was financially dependent on a third party, meaning me, and that this instability made his home a better primary environment for Nora. He mentioned the private school tuition being paid by someone who was not a legal guardian and framed it as evidence that Carla's situation was precarious. Patricia was not worried. She said this kind of argument gets made sometimes and judges tend not to be impressed by it, especially when the alternative is a father who has been completely absent for 5 years and is now married to someone the child has never met. But here is the part I didn't see coming. During the initial paperwork phase, Patricia requested Philip's financial records as part of the standard process. What came back was interesting. Philip and Sandra had applied for adoption through a private agency 14 months ago. The application was denied. The reason listed in the records Patricia was able to access was that Sandra had a medical condition that the agency's evaluating doctor noted required significant daily management, and the agency had concerns about the household's capacity to handle both that and a young child's needs. Patricia said this was relevant because it provided context for why Philip suddenly reappeared after 5 years. The timing lined up exactly with the adoption denial. Carla's reaction when Patricia told her this was to sit very still for a long time and then ask if they could get a copy of the application. They could not get the full application, but through a mutual contact who knew Sandra's sister, some information started to filter through. Sandra had been trying to have children for years. The agency denial had been a significant setback. Someone in Sandra's circle apparently mentioned to this mutual contact that Sandra had been the one pushing for Philip to reconnect with Nora, and that Philip had initially resisted but eventually agreed. I want to be careful here because some of this is secondhand. But what we do know directly, from the legal documents, is that Philip applied for adoption, was denied, and filed for custody of his biological daughter 14 months later. Meanwhile, during all of this, Nora kept going to school. She came home one afternoon and told Carla that her teacher had given her a sticker for reading a whole book by herself. She had no idea any of this was happening. Patricia filed a counter-response outlining Philip's 5-year absence, the lack of any financial contribution, and the medical needs of Nora that had been managed entirely by Carla and, by documented extension, by me. She also submitted the private school's records showing consistent attendance and stable health management. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. One more thing. Philip's parents, the ones who had shown up at my door talking about heritage and roots, apparently called Carla's phone twice in the 2 weeks after the filing. Carla did not answer either call. Patricia advised her not to engage with any of them outside of official legal channels. I documented both calls on Carla's phone log in case it became relevant later. Update 2: the court date happened. I wasn't allowed in the courtroom for most of it, but I sat in the hallway for 4 hours. Carla gave me a full account afterward over coffee at the kitchen table. The judge reviewed everything Patricia submitted. Philip's lawyer made the argument about Carla's living arrangement and financial situation. Patricia responded by submitting a detailed document I had prepared at her request, which laid out the arrangement clearly. Carla contributed to household expenses, was enrolled in university, and was on track to complete her degree in 14 months. The document also included a breakdown of Nora's medical costs over 5 years and who had covered them. Philip was asked directly by the judge when he had last had contact with Nora before showing up at my door. His answer was that he had sent a birthday card when she turned 3. Patricia checked the records. There was no birthday card sent when Nora turned 3. There was one text message sent when Nora turned 1. That was it. The judge was not warm about this. Sandra's situation came up briefly when the judge asked Philip why he believed he could manage the needs of a child with type 1 diabetes. Philip said they had done research. He could not name the type of glucose monitor Nora used. He could not explain what a hypoglycemic episode looked like or how to respond to one. Carla had been managing this since Nora was 2 months old. The judge denied the custody request. Philip was granted supervised visitation, 2 hours per month at a family services center, subject to review after 6 months. The judge also noted that Philip would need to begin paying child support immediately, calculated retroactively from the date of filing. After it was over, Carla sat in the car for a while before starting the engine. Then she drove home, picked Nora up from school, and took her to get ice cream. I stayed at the house. There is one additional thing I want to mention. Sandra was not present at the court date. Philip came with his lawyer and his parents. A few days after the ruling, the mutual contact I mentioned in the last update told us that Sandra had moved out of their house in Pinecrest. I have no way to verify this directly. But Philip's lawyer sent a filing update 2 days after the court date that listed only Philip's address, not a joint address, which is a change from the original filing. I don't know what happened between them and I'm not particularly interested in finding out. Update 3: Philip attended the first supervised visitation appointment at the Family Services Center. Carla dropped Nora off and waited in the lobby. Nora had been told that the man she was meeting was someone her mother used to know. Carla had not introduced him as her father because Patricia had advised keeping introductions neutral until they saw how things went. The session lasted 45 minutes out of the allotted 2 hours. The family services coordinator noted in their report that the child was polite but reserved, and that the adult male had difficulty sustaining conversation or structured activity with a 5-year-old he had never spent time with. Nora asked to leave early. The coordinator honored that request. Carla read the report and filed it. The second visitation appointment was scheduled for the following month. Philip canceled it 3 days before, citing a work conflict. He requested a reschedule. Patricia noted the cancellation in the file. The third appointment, he canceled again. Patricia sent a formal note to his lawyer that 2 consecutive cancellations had been logged and that this would factor into the 6-month review. As of now, there has been no 4th appointment scheduled. His lawyer has gone quiet. The child support payment for the first month came in, 2 weeks late. Nora finished her first semester at the new reading level her teacher had been working toward with her. She made a card for Carla that had a drawing of their house on it. She drew 3 people in the yard. She did not draw anyone else. Carla has her accounting exam in 3 weeks. She's been studying at the kitchen table most evenings after Nora goes to bed. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2: I fell in love with widowed dad and his 2 kids, but when I told him my feelings he pulled away. His manipulative ex-wife came back after 3 years, threatened custody battle and made him choose between me and his children. I'm Sarah, 26F, and I think I might have completely messed up what could have been the best relationship of my life. I've been dating Philip, 35M, for about 8 months now, and I said those 3 words way too soon. Now I'm sitting here wondering if I scared him off completely. Philip is a single dad to 2 kids, Lily, 7F, and Jake, 4M. His ex-wife Lisa moved to another state about 3 years ago for a job opportunity and decided she wanted a fresh start without the kids. She sends birthday cards twice a year and calls maybe once a month, but that's about it. Philip has full custody and honestly, he's an amazing father. I'm a nurse at the local children's hospital, and I met Philip through my neighbor Katie. She's friends with his sister and thought we'd hit it off. Katie set us up on a blind date back in March, and she was right. We went to this little Italian place downtown, and we talked for 4 hours straight. He told me about his kids, his job as a construction supervisor, and how he'd been single for over a year because dating as a single parent was complicated. I told him about my work, my family, and how I'd moved to town 2 years ago for the job. The first few months were pretty standard dating stuff. We'd go out once or twice a week, always when his kids were with his parents or his sister. We'd text throughout the day, and he'd call me most nights after the kids went to bed. He was always upfront about his priorities. His kids came first, and any woman he dated needed to understand that. I respected that completely. Around month 3, things started getting more serious. We were spending more time together, and the physical side of our relationship was developing naturally. We'd had several sleepovers at my place, and everything felt right. But I still hadn't met his kids, and he hadn't brought up the topic. I knew this was a big step for him. He'd mentioned that he'd only introduced the kids to one other woman he'd dated since Lisa left, and that relationship ended badly. The woman had tried to discipline Lily during their second meeting, and Philip ended things immediately. He was very protective of his kids and their feelings. In June, he finally brought up the idea of me meeting Lily and Jake. He said he'd been thinking about it for weeks and felt ready to take that step. We planned it carefully, a casual barbecue at his house on a Saturday afternoon. Nothing too formal or intense. The day arrived, and I was incredibly nervous. I'd worked with kids professionally for years, but this was different. These were his kids, and their opinion of me mattered more than anything. I brought some books I'd picked up at the hospital gift shop, nothing too fancy, just some picture books that kids their age usually liked. When I arrived at his house, Lily hid behind Philip's legs at first. Jake was more curious and kept peeking at me from around the corner. Philip introduced me as his friend Sarah, who worked at the hospital where sick kids go to get better. That seemed to break the ice a bit. The afternoon went better than I could have hoped. Lily warmed up to me after I showed her one of the books about a little girl who wanted to be a doctor. Jake was fascinated when I told him about the ambulances that brought patients to the hospital. By the end of the afternoon, Lily was showing me her room and Jake was asking if I'd come back to play with his dinosaurs. Philip walked me to my car that evening, and I could tell he was pleased with how things had gone. He thanked me for being so patient and natural with the kids. We kissed goodnight, and he said he'd call me later. Over the next few weeks, I started spending more time at his house. Not overnight yet, but I'd come over for dinner or to help with bedtime routines. The kids seemed to accept me as part of their regular schedule. Lily would ask if Miss Sarah was coming over, and Jake would save his favorite dinosaur stories to tell me. Philip and I talked about me staying over at his place, but we agreed to wait until we were sure the kids were completely comfortable with me being around. We didn't want to confuse them or move too fast. The breakthrough came in early August. I was at his house for dinner, and afterward, we were all watching a movie in the living room. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, and Jake was getting drowsy. Philip carried Lily to her room, and I helped Jake brush his teeth and get into his pajamas. As I was tucking Jake into bed, he asked if I was going to be his new mom. The question caught me completely off guard. I told him that I cared about him and Lily very much, and that I liked spending time with her dad. He seemed satisfied with that answer and drifted off to sleep. When I came back to the living room, Philip was cleaning up from dinner. I started helping him, and we worked together in comfortable silence. It struck me how natural this felt, like we were a family unit working together. After the kids were definitely asleep, Philip and I settled on the couch with some wine. We were talking about the day, and he mentioned how natural I was with the kids. He said seeing me help with their bedtime routine made him realize how much he cared about me. One thing led to another, and we ended up in his bedroom. This was the first time we'd been intimate at his house, and something about being in his space, surrounded by evidence of his life with his kids, made everything feel more intense and meaningful. Afterward, we were lying in bed talking quietly. He was telling me about Jake's question and how he'd handled similar situations in the past. The conversation was deep and intimate, and I felt closer to him than I'd ever felt to anyone. That's when it happened. We were cuddled together, and he was playing with my hair. He said something about how much the evening had meant to him, and without thinking, I whispered that I loved him. The words were out before I could stop them. The room went completely silent. Philip stopped playing with my hair, and I could feel his body tense up slightly. I immediately started to panic internally, but I tried to stay calm on the outside. He didn't say anything for what felt like forever. Finally, he kissed the top of my head and said that I was special to him too. Then he pulled me closer and we fell asleep. I woke up the next morning feeling mortified. He was already up making breakfast for the kids, and when I came downstairs, he was normal and friendly but not quite the same as the night before. I helped with breakfast and played with the kids for a bit, but I could tell something had shifted. Since then, things have been different. He still texts me regularly and we still see each other, but there's a tension that wasn't there before. He hasn't brought up that night, and neither have I. We've been intimate since then, but he seems more guarded. The kids still seem happy to see me, and Philip is still affectionate, but I can tell he's holding back. I keep replaying that night in my head, wondering if I should have kept my mouth shut. I've been thinking about bringing it up and maybe explaining that I didn't mean to put pressure on him, but I'm worried that will make things worse. At the same time, this uncertainty is eating at me. Philip has been through a lot with his ex-wife leaving, and I know he's probably cautious about making big emotional commitments. But I can't help wondering if I've ruined something really good by being too honest about my feelings. I've never been in this situation before. With other relationships, either the feelings developed mutually or they didn't develop at all. This is the first time I've been the one to say it first, and definitely the first time I've said it to someone with kids. Part of me wants to just pretend it never happened and see if things go back to normal. But another part of me thinks that's not fair to either of us. If he's not ready for that level of commitment, maybe I need to know now before I get even more invested. I'm also worried about the kids. They've gotten attached to me, and I've gotten attached to them. If this relationship ends because I couldn't control my feelings, I'll lose not just Philip but also Lily and Jake, who have become such an important part of my life. Has anyone else been in a similar situation? How do you handle saying I love you too early, especially when kids are involved? Should I address it directly or just let it go and see what happens? I really care about this man and his family, and I don't want to lose them over poor timing on my part. Update 1. Well, I thought I'd update you all on what's been happening since my last post. Things have taken an unexpected turn, and I'm honestly not sure how to process everything. For the first week after I posted, things continued pretty much the same. Philip and I were still seeing each other regularly, but there was definitely that awkward tension I mentioned. He was being careful with his words, and I was overthinking everything he said or didn't say. Then his sister Jenny called me directly, which was really unusual. She'd been friendly to me whenever we'd run into each other at family gatherings, but we'd never had a one-on-one conversation. She asked if I wanted to meet for coffee, and something in her tone made me think this wasn't just a casual social call. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and Jenny got straight to the point. She said Philip had been acting strange lately, and she wanted to know if something had happened between us. I was honest with her about saying I love you and how he'd reacted. I figured if anyone would understand Philip's perspective, it would be his sister. Jenny's reaction surprised me. She actually laughed and said she'd been wondering when one of us would say it first. She told me that Philip had been talking about me constantly for months, and that she'd never seen him so happy since Lisa left. She said the kids adored me and that Philip's parents were already planning to include me in their Christmas card photo. This confused me even more. If everyone thought we were so solid, why had Philip pulled back after I said I loved him? Jenny explained that Philip had some issues with trust and commitment that went deeper than just Lisa leaving. Apparently, before Lisa moved away, she'd told Philip that she loved him and wanted to work things out. She'd convinced him to go to couples counseling and had made all these promises about being a better partner and mother. Philip had believed her and had started planning for their future together. 2 weeks later, Lisa packed her bags and left. She'd been interviewing for jobs in other states the entire time she was telling Philip she wanted to fix their marriage. She'd used his hope against him to make her exit easier. Jenny said that Philip had been devastated, not just by Lisa leaving, but by how she'd manipulated his emotions right up until the end. He'd sworn off serious relationships for over a year afterward, and even when he started dating again, he was extremely cautious about emotional commitments. According to Jenny, Philip was crazy about me but was terrified of being vulnerable again. She thought that when I said I loved him, it triggered all his old fears about being hurt and abandoned. This conversation with Jenny happened on a Friday. That weekend, Philip and I had plans to take the kids to the zoo. I was dreading it because I didn't know how to act around him with all this new information. But when Saturday came, something was different. Philip seemed more relaxed than he'd been in weeks. He was joking around with the kids, holding my hand as we walked around the zoo, and generally acting like his old self. At one point, Lily ran ahead to look at the giraffes, and Jake was napping in his stroller. Philip and I were sitting on a bench, and he brought up that night 3 weeks ago. He said he'd been thinking about what I'd said, and that he was sorry for how he'd reacted. He explained that he cared about me deeply but that he had some trust issues he was working through. He said he didn't want to hurt me by not being able to say the words back yet, but that didn't mean he didn't feel them. I told him I understood and that I wasn't trying to pressure him. I said I was willing to be patient while he worked through his feelings. We had a really good conversation, and I thought we were back on track. The rest of the zoo trip was wonderful, and that evening after the kids went to bed, we were intimate again. It felt like the closeness we'd had before was returning. But then something happened that completely blindsided me. The following Tuesday, I was at work when I got a text from Philip asking if I could come over that evening. He said he needed to talk to me about something important. The tone of the message immediately made me nervous. When I got to his house, the kids were at his parents' house for the night. Philip was pacing around the living room, and I could tell he was agitated about something. He sat me down and told me that Lisa had called him the night before. She'd been offered a promotion at her job, but it required her to relocate again, this time to a city only 2 hours away from where we lived. She wanted to discuss the possibility of sharing custody of the kids. Philip said that Lisa had been asking about his personal life and whether he was seeing anyone seriously. When he mentioned that he was in a relationship, she'd asked a lot of questions about me, what I did for work, how long we'd been together, whether I'd met the kids. Then Lisa had said something that really shook Philip up. She told him that she'd been doing some soul searching and realized she'd made a huge mistake leaving her family. She said she wanted to try to rebuild their relationship, not just as co-parents, but as a couple. Philip was completely thrown by this. He'd spent 3 years accepting that Lisa was out of their lives permanently, and now she was talking about coming back and trying to put their family back together. He told me that he'd made it clear to Lisa that he was with me and wasn't interested in reconciling with her. But Lisa had pressed the issue, saying that she'd changed and that she owed it to the kids to try to give them their original family back. Philip said that Lisa had asked him to think about it seriously. She'd pointed out that Lily barely remembered having a mother around, and Jake had no real memories of her at all. She said that I might be a nice woman, but I could never replace their actual mother. The way Philip was telling me this story, I could tell that Lisa's words had gotten to him. He kept emphasizing that he'd told her he wasn't interested, but he also kept mentioning the kids and what might be best for them. I asked him directly what he was thinking, and he said he honestly didn't know. He said he loved the life we'd built together, but that he couldn't ignore the possibility that the kids might be better off with their biological parents together. He said he needed some time to think things through and figure out what was best for everyone involved. He asked if I could be patient while he worked through this situation. I told him I understood his position, but inside I was falling apart. 3 weeks ago, I'd been worried about saying I love you too early. Now I was competing with his ex-wife for his attention and possibly for his future. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything Philip had told me about Lisa and how she'd manipulated him before. It seemed like she was doing the same thing again, using the kids and his guilt to get what she wanted. But I also couldn't ignore the fact that she was the mother of his children. If she really had changed and wanted to be part of their lives again, Maybe that would be best for Lily and Jake. The next few days were torture. Philip texted me a few times, but our conversations were stilted and awkward. He was clearly struggling with this decision, and I was trying to be supportive while also protecting myself emotionally. On Friday, he called and asked if I wanted to come over for dinner. He said the kids had been asking about me, and he thought it would be good for all of us to spend time together. When I got to his house, Lily ran up to me and hugged me tight. She said she'd missed me and asked where I'd been. Jake showed me a new dinosaur book he'd gotten, and we spent the evening reading together. After the kids went to bed, Philip and I sat on the couch, but neither of us knew what to say. Finally, he told me that Lisa was planning to visit the following weekend to see the kids. He said it would be their first time seeing her in person in over a year. He asked if I could stay away that weekend so that the kids could focus on reconnecting with their mother. I agreed, but it stung. I felt like I was being pushed aside so that Lisa could waltz back into their lives. As I was leaving that night, Philip kissed me goodbye, but it felt different. It felt like he was already pulling away, preparing himself for the possibility of a different future. I spent that weekend at my apartment, going crazy wondering what was happening at Philip's house. I kept imagining Lisa playing with the kids, helping with bedtime routines, and doing all the things that had become part of my routine with them. On Sunday evening, Philip called. He sounded exhausted. He said Lisa's visit had gone well from the kids' perspective, they'd been excited to see her and had enjoyed having her around. But he said that he'd realized during the visit that he didn't feel anything romantic for her anymore. He said that watching Lisa with the kids had reminded him of all the reasons their relationship hadn't worked. She'd been impatient with Jake when he got fussy, had criticized some of Philip's parenting decisions, and had spent most of the weekend talking about her job and her new life rather than focusing on the kids. Philip said that by Sunday evening, he'd been relieved when Lisa left. He said he'd realized that whatever feelings he'd once had for her were completely gone, and that he couldn't imagine trying to rebuild a relationship with someone who'd hurt him so badly. But then he said something that really worried me. He said that even though he wasn't interested in reconciling with Lisa, her visit had made him realize how complicated his situation was. He said he was concerned about dragging me into the middle of what could become a messy custody battle, and he wasn't sure it was fair to ask me to deal with all the drama that came with dating a single father. He said he needed more time to figure out what Lisa's return to the area would mean for him and the kids, and what that would mean for our relationship. I told him I understood, but honestly, I felt like I was being punished for something that wasn't my fault. I'd been patient and supportive, and now I was being pushed away because his ex-wife had decided to complicate their lives again. We ended the call with plans to talk again in a few days, but I have no idea what's going to happen. I feel like I'm in limbo, waiting for Philip to decide whether he wants to fight for our relationship or whether he's going to let Lisa's return derail everything we've built together. I'm trying to stay hopeful, but I'm also trying to prepare myself for the possibility that this might be the end of our relationship. The uncertainty is killing me, and I don't know how much longer I can handle being in this position. Update 2: I've been putting off writing this update because honestly, I'm still processing everything that's happened. The situation with Philip and Lisa has gotten much more complicated than I ever imagined it could. After my last update, Philip and I continued in that weird limbo state for about 2 weeks. We'd text occasionally, but we weren't seeing each other regularly. He said he needed space to figure things out with Lisa and the custody situation, and I was trying to respect that while also protecting my own sanity. Then Lisa made her move to the city official. She found an apartment about 20 minutes from Philip's house and started pushing for a formal custody arrangement. She wanted the kids every other weekend and one night during the week for dinner. Philip was conflicted about this. On one hand, he thought the kids deserved to have their mother in their lives if she was genuinely committed to being there. On the other hand, he was worried about the impact on their routine and stability. He decided to start slowly. Lisa would take the kids for Saturday afternoon visits, and if those went well, they'd gradually increase the time. During this period, Philip and I barely saw each other. He said he wanted to see how the kids adjusted to having Lisa around before bringing me back into the picture. I understood his reasoning, but it hurt to be essentially removed from their lives after becoming such a big part of their routine. 3 weeks into Lisa's new arrangement, Philip called me late one evening. He sounded upset, and I could tell something had happened. He told me that Lisa had picked up the kids that afternoon for what was supposed to be a trip to the park and ice cream. She was supposed to have them back by 6 o'clock for dinner. When 7 o'clock came and went with no word from her, Philip started calling and texting. Lisa finally responded around 8:30, saying that she'd decided to take the kids to dinner and a movie, and that she'd have them back by 10. Philip was furious. He'd specifically told her that the kids needed to be home by 6 because they had school the next day, and Jake got cranky when his bedtime routine was disrupted. When Lisa finally brought the kids home, they were overtired and overstimulated. Jake was crying, and Lily was acting out. It took Philip over an hour to get them calmed down and ready for bed. He confronted Lisa about ignoring the time limits they'd agreed on, and she got defensive. She said that as their mother, she should have some flexibility in how she spent time with her own children. She accused Philip of being controlling and trying to prevent her from building a relationship with the kids. The argument escalated, and Lisa ended up leaving angry. She texted Philip later that night saying that she thought they needed to involve lawyers to establish a more formal custody arrangement because she wasn't going to be micromanaged by him. Philip was stressed and exhausted by this confrontation. He said that dealing with Lisa was bringing back all the old feelings of frustration and helplessness he'd felt when they were married. He'd forgotten how she could twist situations to make herself the victim when she was the one who'd caused the problem. He asked if I wanted to come over the next evening after the kids went to bed. He said he missed me and needed to talk to someone who understood the situation. When I got to his house, Philip looked terrible. He was clearly not sleeping well, and the stress of the Lisa situation was taking a toll on him. He apologized for pushing me away and said that he'd realized over the past few weeks how much he'd missed having me in his life. He said that watching Lisa interact with the kids had reminded him of why their relationship had failed in the first place. She was selfish and impulsive, and she put her own needs ahead of the kids' well-being. He said that in contrast, he'd been thinking about how naturally I'd fit into their family and how much the kids had thrived when I was around regularly. We talked for hours that night, and I felt like we were finally getting back to a good place. Philip said he wanted to start seeing each other regularly again, but he was worried about how Lisa would react if she found out he was in a serious relationship. I told him that I understood his concerns, but that I wasn't willing to be a secret. If we were going to be together, I needed to know that he was committed to making our relationship work, regardless of what Lisa thought about it. Philip agreed, and we decided to take things slowly but to be open about our relationship. He said he'd tell Lisa that he was seeing someone seriously, and that she needed to respect that. For the next few weeks, things seemed to be improving. Philip and I were spending time together again, and the kids were happy to have me back in their routine. Lisa had backed off on the custody demands after Philip threatened to get his own lawyer involved. But then Lisa did something that changed everything. She started showing up at Lily's school during pickup time. She'd wait in the parking lot and try to talk to Lily when she came out with the other kids. She'd give Lily little gifts and tell her that she missed her and wanted to spend more time with her. The school called Philip when they noticed what was happening. They said that Lily seemed confused and upset after these encounters, and they were concerned about Lisa's behavior. Philip confronted Lisa about this, and she denied doing anything wrong. She said she had every right to see her daughter, and that Philip was being unreasonable by trying to limit her access. But then Lily started having nightmares and asking questions about why her mommy had left in the first place. She'd been too young to really understand when Lisa moved away, but now she was old enough to be confused and hurt by the situation. Philip decided that he needed to set firmer boundaries with Lisa. He told her that all contact with the kids needed to go through him, and that she couldn't show up at their school or other activities without his permission. Lisa's response was to threaten to take him to court for full custody. She said that she'd been documenting everything and that she could prove that Philip was being an unfit father by keeping the kids away from their mother. This threat terrified Philip. Even though he knew Lisa didn't have a strong case, the idea of a custody battle was overwhelming. He'd heard horror stories about fathers losing custody to mothers who'd been absent for years, and he couldn't risk losing his kids. He started pulling back from our relationship again. He said that he couldn't afford to give Lisa any ammunition to use against him in court, and that meant keeping his personal life as quiet as possible. I was frustrated and hurt by this. I understood his concerns about the kids, but I felt like he was letting Lisa control our relationship even though she'd already proven herself to be unreliable and manipulative. We had a big fight about this. I told Philip that he was letting Lisa win by allowing her threats to derail our relationship. I said that if he truly cared about me, he'd find a way to make things work instead of just giving up when things got difficult. Philip said that I didn't understand the pressure he was under as a single father. He said that the kids had to come first, and that meant making sacrifices in other areas of his life. I told him that I'd never asked him to choose between me and his kids, but that I also couldn't be in a relationship where I was constantly being pushed aside whenever Lisa decided to create drama. We ended up taking a break from seeing each other. Philip said he needed to focus on dealing with the Lisa situation, and I said I needed to figure out whether I could handle being with someone whose ex-wife had so much power over our relationship. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, Philip and I have barely spoken. I've heard through Jenny that Lisa has backed off on the custody threats, but that she's still trying to insert herself into the kids' lives in inappropriate ways. I miss Philip and the kids terribly, but I'm also angry about how this whole situation has been handled. I feel like I've been jerked around for months, and I'm tired of being treated like a secondary priority. I keep going back and forth about whether to reach out to Philip or just accept that this relationship isn't going to work. Part of me thinks that if he really wanted to be with me, he'd find a way to make it happen. But another part of me understands that his situation is genuinely complicated and that he's trying to protect his kids. I don't know what the right answer is. I love Philip and I love Lily and Jake, but I'm not sure I can handle being in a relationship where I'm constantly walking on eggshells because of what his ex-wife might do. I'm giving myself until the end of the month to decide whether to try to work things out with Philip or to move on completely. I can't keep living in this limbo forever. Update 3. I wasn't planning to write another update, but several people have messaged me asking what happened, so I figured I owed you all a conclusion to this story. The short version is that Philip and I are no longer together, and honestly, I'm relieved about that now, even though it was devastating at the time. After my last update, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I really wanted from a relationship and whether I could handle the complications that came with dating Philip. I realized that while I loved him and the kids, I deserved to be with someone who wouldn't constantly push me away when things got difficult. I decided to reach out to Philip one more time to see if we could work things out. I called him and asked if we could meet to talk. He agreed, and we met for coffee at a neutral location. I was honest with him about how I'd been feeling. I told him that I understood his situation was complicated, but that I couldn't be in a relationship where I was constantly being sidelined whenever Lisa created drama. I said that I needed to know that he was committed to making our relationship work, regardless of what challenges came up. Philip listened to everything I had to say, and then he told me something that really surprised me. He said that over the past few weeks, he'd been thinking about our relationship and had realized that he wasn't ready to be in a serious relationship with anyone. He said that dealing with Lisa's return had made him realize that he still had a lot of unresolved issues from their marriage and divorce. He said that he'd been using our relationship as a way to avoid dealing with those issues, but that wasn't fair to me or to himself. He also said that he'd been thinking about what was best for the kids, and he'd realized that bringing someone new into their lives permanently needed to be a decision he made when he was emotionally ready, not just because he was lonely or wanted companionship. I appreciated his honesty, but I was also hurt that it had taken him this long to figure that out. I told him that I wished he'd been able to recognize these things earlier, before we'd both gotten so invested in the relationship. We talked for about an hour, and by the end of the conversation, we both agreed that it was best to end things. Philip said he cared about me deeply and that he hoped we could remain friends, but that he needed to focus on himself and his kids for the foreseeable future. I told him that I needed some time and space before I could consider a friendship, and he understood. The hardest part was saying goodbye to Lily and Jake. I'd become so attached to them, and I knew they'd be confused about why I suddenly wasn't around anymore. Philip said he'd explained to them that I'd moved on to other things, but that I'd enjoyed getting to know them. For the first few weeks after our breakup, I was really sad and angry. I felt like I'd wasted 8 months of my life on someone who wasn't emotionally available. I also felt guilty about Lily and Jake, who'd gotten attached to me and were now dealing with another adult leaving their lives. But as time passed, I started to see the situation more clearly. Philip was right that he wasn't ready for a serious relationship. The way he'd handled the Lisa situation showed that he still had a lot of work to do on himself before he could be a good partner to anyone. I also realized that I'd been so focused on trying to make the relationship work that I'd ignored some red flags. Philip had a pattern of pulling away when things got difficult, and that wasn't something that was going to change just because we loved each other. About a month after our breakup, Jenny reached out to me. She said that Philip had told her what happened, and that she was sorry things hadn't worked out. She also told me that Lisa had continued to cause problems and that Philip was now dealing with a formal custody evaluation. Apparently, Lisa had followed through on her threats to take Philip to court, claiming that he was an unfit father. The case was still ongoing, but Jenny said that Philip's lawyer was confident that Lisa wouldn't get more than supervised visitation, given her history of abandoning the kids. Jenny also told me that Philip had started seeing a counselor to work through his issues from his marriage and divorce. She said that he'd realized that he'd never properly dealt with the trauma of Lisa leaving, and that it was affecting his ability to have healthy relationships. I was glad to hear that Philip was getting help, but I also felt validated in my decision to end things. It confirmed that he really wasn't ready to be in a serious relationship, and that I'd been right to prioritize my own emotional well-being. A few weeks ago, I ran into Philip at the grocery store. It was awkward at first, but we ended up talking for a few minutes. He looked better than he had in months, less stressed and more like his old self. He asked how I was doing, and I told him that I was good. I'd been focusing on my work and my friendships, and had started dating someone new, a fellow nurse named David who didn't have kids but was great with the pediatric patients at the hospital. Philip seemed genuinely happy for me, and he told me that he was doing better too. He said that the custody situation with Lisa was almost resolved, and that he'd been making progress in counseling. He also said that he'd been thinking about our relationship and that he realized he'd handled things poorly. He apologized for the way he'd treated me and said that he hoped I'd find someone who could give me the kind of relationship I deserved. I appreciated his apology, and I told him that I hoped he'd be able to work through his issues and find happiness, whether that was with someone new or just as a single father. We parted on good terms, and I felt like I finally had closure on that chapter of my life. Looking back, I don't regret my relationship with Philip. I learned a lot about myself and what I want in a partner. I also learned that sometimes loving someone isn't enough if they're not in a place where they can love you back fully. I'm happy with David, who's emotionally available and doesn't have complicated ex-wife drama. We're taking things slowly, but I can already tell that this relationship has the potential to be healthier and more stable than what I had with Philip. As for saying I love you too early, I've realized that there's no such thing as too early if you're with the right person. The problem wasn't my timing, it was that Philip wasn't ready to hear those words from anyone, regardless of when they were said. I hope Philip is able to work through his issues and find happiness, and I hope Lily and Jake are okay. But I'm also grateful that I had the strength to walk away from a situation that wasn't working for me, even though it was painful at the time. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying to fix someone else's problems and focus on your own happiness instead. My BF had a dream I cheated and turned it into a 3 a.m. interrogation about my male classmates while calling my best friend horrible names. Reddit convinced me to leave him. My boyfriend Titus, 23M, and I, 21F, met through mutual friends at a party back in college. He was sweet at first, always texting me good morning, bringing me coffee before my early classes, and making sure I got home safe. My friends thought he was great. My mom loved him when they met. Everything seemed perfect for the first few months. The problem started small. Maybe 3 months into dating, he asked me to share my location with him on my phone. He said it was for safety reasons because I walked home late sometimes from the library. I didn't think much of it and turned it on. Then he wanted my Instagram password because he said couples should have nothing to hide from each other. I gave it to him because I figured I had nothing to hide anyway. Around 6 months in, he started getting weird about my response times. If I took more than 10 minutes to reply to his texts, he would send follow-up messages asking what I was doing. I'm a full-time student taking 5 classes, so sometimes I'm genuinely busy or my phone is on silent during lectures. He would say he understood but then bring it up later during arguments about how I always make him wait. He also didn't like most of my friends. My best friend since high school is named Kara. She's outgoing and likes to go to parties on weekends. Titus started calling her a bad influence about 8 months into our relationship. He said girls like her only bring drama and that she probably sleeps around. I defended Kara at first, but he would get so upset that I eventually stopped mentioning her as much. The real issue that made me want to write this post happened 2 nights ago. I had taken a nap in the evening because I was exhausted from studying for midterms. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. and couldn't fall back asleep, so I was just scrolling through Instagram on my phone. That's when I noticed Titus was active too. The green dot was next to his name. I sent him a text asking if he was okay and why he was up so late. He usually goes to bed around midnight. He replied pretty quickly and said he couldn't sleep. I asked if everything was alright and he said he had a bad dream. I told him I was sorry and asked if he wanted to talk about it. That's when things got strange. He said he dreamed that I cheated on him with someone from one of my classes. I immediately felt bad even though I hadn't done anything wrong. I told him it was just a dream and that I would never do that to him. I even apologized for his dream making him upset, which sounds stupid now that I'm writing it out. He didn't seem satisfied with that answer. He started saying that dreams can be warnings and that maybe his subconscious was picking up on something. I tried to reassure him again that nothing was going on and that I was completely faithful to him. He asked why I was awake at 2:30 in the morning then. I explained that I had napped earlier and my sleep schedule was messed up. Then he asked why I texted him if I was just casually scrolling Instagram. He said it seemed suspicious that I reached out right when he was awake, like maybe I was checking to see if he was asleep so I could talk to someone else. I was confused because I had texted him out of genuine concern when I saw he was active so late. I suggested that we both just try to go back to sleep since we were both tired and not thinking clearly. That made things worse. He said I was trying to get him off the phone and asked who I was planning to call after he went to sleep. I kept telling him there was nobody else but he wouldn't believe me. He brought up how I sometimes take a while to respond to his messages during the day. I explained again that I'm in class or studying and can't always be on my phone. He said that was a convenient excuse and that my classes are only 50 minutes long, so there's no reason I can't check my phone every few minutes. I told him that's not how college classes work and that professors get annoyed when students are on their phones. Then he brought up Kara again. He said she's probably teaching me how to hide things from him and that birds of a feather flock together. He called her some names that I don't want to repeat here. I tried to defend her and said she's been my friend for years and has always been there for me. He said that's exactly the problem and that she's probably encouraging me to cheat. I mentioned that I have a study group for one of my harder classes and there are only about 7 people in it total. He immediately jumped on that and asked how many of them were guys. I said 3 of them were guys and 4 were girls including me. He said 3 guys was 3 too many and asked why I needed to study with men if I had a boyfriend. I tried to explain that I don't pick my study group based on gender and that we're all just trying to pass a difficult statistics class. He said I was being naive if I thought those guys didn't have other intentions. I told him they were just classmates and that we only met in the library to study. He asked how I would feel if he started hanging out with a bunch of girls. I told him I would trust him and that I don't have a problem with him having female friends as long as nothing inappropriate was happening. This apparently was the wrong answer because he called me stupid for being so trusting and said that meant I was probably doing the same thing I claimed to be okay with. The argument went in circles like this for almost an hour. Every time I tried to defend myself or explain something, he would twist it into more evidence that I was hiding something. I was sitting in my bed getting more and more exhausted but also anxious because I didn't know how to make him believe me. He also brought up my home situation. I've been having issues with my mom lately. We argue a lot about small things and the house has been tense. I had mentioned to Titus a few days ago that I needed to get out of the house more because the constant arguing was stressing me out. During this argument at 3 a.m., he threw that back at me and said only girls who are up to no good need to constantly be out of the house. I tried to explain that I meant I needed to go to the library or coffee shops to study in peace, not that I was going out to party or meet guys. He said it all sounded like excuses and that if I really loved him, I would just stay home where he could reach me easily. Eventually he said he was getting too angry to keep talking and that he was going to sleep. He told me not to text him anymore that night. I said goodnight and that I loved him, but he didn't respond. I stayed awake for the rest of the night just staring at my phone and going over the conversation in my head. The next day he texted me like nothing had happened. He sent me a good morning text with a heart emoji. I responded, but I was still upset about the argument. He asked what was wrong and I said I was still thinking about our conversation from the night before. He said I needed to let it go and that he was already over it. But I'm not over it. I keep thinking about all the things he said. The more I replay it in my mind, the more I realize how many times he's done things like this. The location sharing that was supposed to be for my safety has become a way for him to question where I'm all the time. If I'm somewhere unexpected, even just at a different coffee shop than usual, I get a text asking why I'm there. He has all my social media passwords and sometimes I'll notice that posts I've liked have been unliked. When I ask him about it, he says I shouldn't be liking posts from guys I don't know or photos that are too revealing, even if they're from female celebrities or influencers. The FaceTime checks are another thing. If I tell him I'm going somewhere, even just to the grocery store with my roommate, he'll want to FaceTime me to see where I actually am. He says it's because he misses me and wants to see my face, but it feels like he's checking up on me. I also realized he has my friend's addresses saved in his phone. I found this out a few months ago when Kara moved to a new apartment. He asked me for her new address and I asked why he needed it. He said he liked to know where I was going when I visited people. At the time I thought it was protective, but now I'm not sure. My roommate walked in on me crying yesterday afternoon. I was sitting on my bed reading back through some of our old text conversations. She asked what was wrong and I showed her the messages from the other night. She sat there reading them and her face just kept getting more concerned. When she finished reading, she asked me if this was normal for us. I realized I had been minimizing a lot of his behavior when talking to my friends. I would mention the arguments but frame them as misunderstandings or say he was just worried about me. She pointed out that some of the things he said weren't okay and that accusing me of cheating based on a dream was manipulative. I had never thought of it that way before. In my head, I had been trying to figure out what I was doing wrong and how I could be more reassuring to him. His ex-girlfriend apparently did cheat on him, which he told me early in our relationship. I thought if I was just patient and understanding enough, he would eventually trust me and the accusations would stop. But they haven't stopped. If anything, they've gotten worse over time. The checks are more frequent. The accusations come out of nowhere. I can't even be awake at a weird hour without it becoming suspicious. My roommate suggested I talk to someone about this, maybe post on Reddit to get outside perspectives. She said I was too close to the situation to see it clearly. So here I am at 4 a.m. again, writing this all out. I guess my question is whether I'm not being understanding enough about his trust issues from his past relationship. Should I be doing more to reassure him? Or is this behavior something I should be worried about? I love him and I don't want to give up on us, but I also don't know how to fix this if nothing I do is ever enough to make him trust me. I haven't told my mom about any of this because she already doesn't like that I'm so serious with someone at my age. She thinks I should be focusing on school and my future career. If I told her about these arguments, she would probably tell me to break up with him immediately. I just need some honest advice from people who don't know either of us personally. Am I overreacting to what happened the other night? Is this normal relationship stuff that all couples go through? Update 1: I wasn't going to update this because I honestly didn't expect so many people to respond. I've spent the last few days reading through all the comments and I don't know how to feel about most of them. A lot of people use the word abuse. That felt extreme to me at first. I kept thinking that abuse is physical and Titus has never hit me or anything like that. But then people explained that there are other types and I started looking into it more. Someone sent me a link to a list of controlling behaviors. I went through it and checked off way more boxes than I wanted to admit. The constant location tracking. The password sharing. The isolation from friends. The interrogations about where I've been. The accusations without any actual evidence. It was all there on the list. I want to be clear about something though. Some of the comments were really harsh. People called me stupid for not seeing this sooner. Someone said I was asking to be treated like this by allowing it. Those comments hurt more than I expected them to. I know everyone was trying to help, but it felt like I was being attacked from both sides. My roommate sat with me while I read through everything. She had been suspecting things weren't right for a while but didn't want to overstep. She told me that she had heard some of our phone conversations through the walls and that the way he spoke to me wasn't normal. I decided I needed to end things with Titus. The Reddit comments were one thing, but having my roommate confirm that she had been worried too made it real. I couldn't convince myself anymore that I was overreacting. I didn't want to do it over text, but I also didn't want to meet him in person. I was worried about how he would react. So I called him 3 days ago in the afternoon when I knew he would be done with work. He answered the phone in a good mood. He had sent me flowers that morning with an apology card for being stressed lately. I think he could tell something was wrong from my voice because his tone changed immediately. He asked what was going on. I told him I thought we needed to break up. There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then he asked why and what had changed. I said I had been thinking about our relationship and realized that some things weren't healthy. I specifically mentioned the constant accusations and the controlling behavior. He lost it. He started yelling about how he knew I was cheating and that this just proved his gut feeling was right all along. I tried to explain that there was nobody else and that I was leaving because of how he treated me, not because of another person. He wouldn't listen. He went through a list of every guy he thought I might be leaving him for. The guys in my study group. A guy from my chemistry lab last semester who I had mentioned once. Even one of my roommate's friends who had been at our apartment a few times for game nights. He was convinced I had been planning this and that someone was waiting in the wings. I stayed quiet while he yelled. I had read advice from some of the Reddit comments that said not to engage when someone is being irrational. After about 10 minutes of him going off, I just repeated that it was over and that I needed him to respect my decision. That's when he switched tactics. He started crying and apologizing. He said he knew he had trust issues and that he would work on them. He promised to stop asking for my location and to give me back all my passwords. He said he would give me space and stop questioning everything I did. I had heard this before though. After big arguments, he would always apologize and promise to change. Things would be good for maybe a week or two, and then we would end up right back in the same patterns. I told him I didn't think he could change and that I needed to move on. He asked if we could at least talk in person. I said no. He asked if we could take a break instead of breaking up completely. I said no to that too. He kept trying to negotiate like this was something we could compromise on. Finally, I told him I was going to hang up and that I would appreciate it if he didn't contact me anymore. He started yelling again about how I was making a huge mistake and that I would regret this. He said no one else would ever care about me the way he did. Then he said some really nasty things about Kara and my roommate, blaming them for putting ideas in my head. I hung up on him. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. My roommate was in the living room and heard most of it through my door. She came in and just sat with me for a while. The next few hours were bad. He texted me 47 times. I counted. The messages went from begging me to reconsider, to insulting me, to apologizing again, and then back to accusations. He said he saw on the location tracker that I was at home and demanded I turn off my location sharing since we weren't together anymore. I went into my phone settings and removed his access to my location. I also changed all my passwords that he had. Instagram, Twitter, even my email. I found out he had been logged into my Instagram on his phone and had been reading my DMs. There were messages from Kara asking if I was okay that I never saw because he had archived them. He tried calling me 6 times that evening. I didn't answer any of them. He left voicemails that I haven't listened to yet. My roommate said I should save them just in case, so they're still in my phone. The next morning, he showed up at my apartment. I didn't know he was coming. My roommate answered the door and told him I didn't want to see him. He tried to push past her to get inside but she blocked the doorway and threatened to call campus security. He eventually left but not before shouting some things in the hallway that our neighbors definitely heard. I filed a report with campus security about him showing up. They said to let them know if he tried to contact me again or came back to the building. They couldn't do much more than that since he hadn't technically threatened me, but they made a note of it. That was 2 days ago. He hasn't tried to come back but the texts haven't completely stopped. They're less frequent now, maybe 1 or 2 a day instead of constant. I haven't responded to any of them. I blocked his number yesterday after someone in the comments suggested it. I'm not going to lie and say I'm completely okay with all of this. There are moments where I miss him, or at least I miss the version of him from when we first started dating. I keep thinking about the good times we had and wondering if I gave up too easily. Then I remember the 3 a.m. accusations and the way he yelled at me on the phone and I know I made the right choice. Kara came over last night. I had been avoiding her calls because I felt embarrassed about how I had distanced myself from her over the past few months. She wasn't mad though. She said she understood and that she was just glad I was okay. We stayed up talking about everything and it felt good to have my best friend back. My mom still doesn't know any of this happened. I'm not ready to tell her yet because I know she'll be disappointed in me for staying with him as long as I did. Maybe I'll tell her eventually, but right now I just want to move forward. I wanted to thank everyone who commented on my original post, even the people who were harsh about it. You were right about pretty much everything. I didn't want to believe it at first but you gave me the push I needed to actually do something instead of just accepting this as normal. Update 2 things have been quiet for the most part. Titus stopped texting me after I blocked his number. I thought that was the end of it and that we could both just move on with our lives. I was wrong. Last week, I started getting messages from a number I didn't recognize. At first, they seemed like wrong number texts. Just random stuff like asking if I wanted to grab coffee or saying they missed talking to me. I ignored them because I get spam texts sometimes. Then the messages got more specific. They mentioned things only Titus would know about. Inside jokes from our relationship. Details about arguments we had. I realized it was him texting from a different number. I blocked that number too. Then another unknown number started texting me. I blocked that one as well. This happened 4 more times over the course of a week. He was either using different phones or some kind of app that lets you generate temporary numbers. The messages weren't threatening exactly, but they were persistent. He kept saying he just wanted to talk and that I was being unfair by not giving him closure. He said he deserved an explanation for why I really left and that he didn't believe it was just about trust issues. I didn't respond to any of these messages. I took screenshots of all of them and sent them to campus security like they had told me to do. They said they would reach out to him and remind him that continuing to contact me after I had made it clear I didn't want communication could be considered harassment. I don't know if campus security actually contacted him or what they said, but the texts from random numbers stopped after that. I thought that would be the end of it again. Then Kara called me 4 days ago. She sounded upset. She said Titus had sent her a long message on Instagram asking her to convince me to talk to him. The message said that I was being influenced by bad friends and that if Kara really cared about me, she would help us work things out. Kara told him to leave her alone and blocked him. But then he found her on Facebook and sent essentially the same message there. She blocked him on that platform too. He tried Twitter after that. She ended up having to make all her social media accounts private and block him on everything. The same thing happened to my roommate. She got messages from him on multiple platforms saying that she had ruined our relationship and that she should mind her own business. He told her that she was jealous of what we had and that she wanted me to be single like her. My roommate is actually in a relationship and has been for 2 years, so that didn't even make sense. I felt terrible that my friends were being dragged into this. I apologized to both of them, but they said it wasn't my fault and that they knew he was unstable. Kara said she had never trusted him and had been waiting for something like this to happen. Then something else happened that really freaked me out. I was in the library studying 2 days ago when one of the guys from my statistics study group came over to my table. His name is Marcus. We're not friends outside of class, just study partners. Marcus sat down and asked if I knew someone named Titus. I felt my stomach drop. I asked why and he said a guy named Titus had sent him a message on Instagram warning him to stay away from me. The message said that I had a boyfriend and that Marcus needed to respect that. I had to explain to Marcus that Titus was my ex and that we had broken up almost a month ago. Marcus seemed confused and showed me the message. It was definitely from Titus's Instagram account. The message was sent the night before. I told Marcus I was sorry he got pulled into my drama and explained a little bit about the situation. Marcus was understanding about it and said to let him know if Titus tried to contact him again. But the whole interaction was humiliating. I had to admit to a classmate that my ex was essentially stalking me. I went back to campus security after that and showed them all the new evidence. The texts from multiple numbers. The messages to my friends. The message to Marcus. They took it more seriously this time and said they would be issuing Titus a formal no-contact order through the university. I also found out from campus security that Titus had been hanging around near my apartment building. One of the security guards had seen him sitting in his car in the parking lot on 2 separate occasions. When approached, he said he was waiting for a friend who lived in the building. But the security guard checked with residents and no one was expecting him. The no-contact order means Titus isn't allowed to come to my building, contact me directly or through others, or be within 100 feet of me on campus. If he violates it, he could face disciplinary action from the university including possible suspension. I thought this would make me feel safer, but honestly it just made me more anxious. The fact that he had been sitting outside my building without me knowing was terrifying. I started looking over my shoulder whenever I walked anywhere. I changed my routine so I wasn't predictable. I stopped going to my usual coffee shop and started studying in different locations. Kara has been staying over at my apartment a few nights a week. She says it's because she likes hanging out with me and my roommate, but I know it's also because she's worried. My roommate got a Ring doorbell for our apartment door so we can see who's outside before opening it. I finally told my mom what's been going on. I called her 3 days ago and explained everything from the beginning. The controlling behavior during the relationship, the breakup, and everything that's happened since. She was quiet for a long time after I finished talking. Then she asked why I didn't tell her sooner. I said I was embarrassed and didn't want her to say I told you so about dating seriously during college. She said she would never say that about something like this and that she was just worried about me. My mom wanted to drive up to campus immediately, but I convinced her I was okay and that campus security was handling it. She made me promise to call her every day and to let her know if anything else happened. She also said if I wanted to come home for a while, I could take a break from school and stay with her. I don't want to leave school though. I'm not going to let Titus control my life anymore, even indirectly. I worked hard to get into this college and I'm not going to run away because my ex can't handle rejection. I haven't seen Titus in person since he showed up at my apartment that one time. I did see on Instagram that he posted a story about how people change and show their true colors. It was clearly about me. I didn't engage with it and neither did any of my friends. Some mutual acquaintances have reached out to ask what happened between us. I've kept my answers vague and just said we wanted different things. I don't want to wear everything publicly because I know it would get back to him and probably make things worse. The no contact order from the university went into effect yesterday. Campus security told me they served it to Titus in person and explained the consequences if he violates it. I'm hoping this is finally the thing that makes him back off and leave me alone. Update 3. I'm writing this final update because some people messaged me asking if I was okay and what ended up happening. Titus violated the no contact order twice. The first time was about a week after it was issued. He sent me an email from an address I didn't recognize. It was long and rambling, talking about how unfair I was being and how the no contact order was an overreaction. I forwarded it to campus security immediately. The second violation happened 2 weeks ago. I was walking back from class and saw him standing near the building where my statistics class meets. He wasn't close enough to violate the 100 feet rule technically, but he was clearly waiting to see me. When I walked past, he tried to talk to me. I didn't acknowledge him and went straight to campus security to report it. After the second violation, the university moved forward with disciplinary action. I don't know all the details because they can't share that information with me, but I was told he's facing academic probation and had to attend mandatory counseling sessions. If he violates the order again, he'll be suspended. I haven't had any contact from him in the past 2 weeks. No texts, no emails, no Instagram messages to my friends. It's been quiet and I can finally breathe a little easier. My statistics class ended last week and I got a B+, which I'm happy with considering everything that was going on. Marcus and I are still friendly when we run into each other on campus. The whole situation with Titus reaching out to him never got brought up again, which I appreciate. Kara and I have been hanging out regularly again. It's nice to have my best friend back without feeling guilty about it. We went to a concert last weekend and I didn't have to check in with anyone or explain where I was going. It felt freeing. My roommate and I are already planning to live together again next year. She's been incredibly supportive through all of this and I don't know what I would have done without her. The Ring doorbell is staying up though, just in case. I've been thinking a lot about how I ended up in that relationship and why I stayed as long as I did. I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers or that I've learned some big life lesson. What I do know is that I ignored a lot of warning signs because I wanted the relationship to work. The location sharing seemed reasonable at first. The password sharing felt like trust. The questioning felt like he cared. I kept making excuses for behavior that should have been immediate deal breakers. I told myself he was just insecure because of his ex, that he would get better with time, that I wasn't being patient enough. I'm not dating anyone right now and I don't plan to for a while. I need time to figure out what I actually want in a relationship versus what I was settling for. I need to trust my own judgment again instead of second-guessing myself constantly. My mom has been calling me every few days to check in. We've gotten closer through all of this, which is unexpected but nice. She hasn't said I told you so once, even though she probably wants to. She just listens when I need to talk and sends me care packages with my favorite snacks. I changed my phone number last week. It felt like the final step in cutting ties with Titus. Only my close friends and family have the new number. I also went through all my social media and made everything private. I removed anyone I didn't personally know and blocked several accounts that I suspected might be Titus using fake profiles. Campus security told me the no contact order will remain in effect for the rest of the academic year. After that, I'll be graduating and moving away for a job I accepted in a different state. Titus will still have another year of school left here. The distance will be good. I don't miss him anymore. I missed who I thought he was for a while, but I realize now that version of him never really existed. The sweet guy who brought me coffee before class was the same person who yelled at me on the phone and accused me of cheating based on a dream. I can't separate the good parts from the bad parts because they were all part of the same manipulative pattern. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my original post, I hope you take the comments seriously even if they seem harsh. The people on Reddit were right about Titus even when I didn't want to hear it. They saw clearly what I couldn't see because I was too close to it. I'm doing okay now. Some days are better than others. I still get anxious sometimes when I see someone who looks like Titus from behind, or when I get a notification from an unknown number. But those moments are getting less frequent. I don't regret posting on Reddit that night when I couldn't sleep. If I hadn't, I might still be in that relationship trying to convince myself that constant surveillance was love. So thank you to everyone who took the time to comment, even the ones who were brutally honest about how bad things were. That's where things stand now. I'm moving forward with my life and Titus isn't part of it anymore. That's all I really wanted from this situation. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. I got full engineering scholarship but parents demanded I give it to spoiled sister instead, so they exiled me at 18. But when I became successful they tried manipulating me back with fake apologies until they were exposed. I never thought I would write about my family on Reddit, but here I am after 5 years of silence. This whole situation started when I was 17 and got accepted to a prestigious engineering program with a full scholarship. Now my parents are back asking for help after everything fell apart for them. I am Adam, 23M, and I have a younger sister Delilah, 21F. Growing up, our family owned a small but successful catering business. My parents, Roger, 52M, and Lillian, 49F, always made it clear that Delilah was their priority. She got dance lessons, art classes, expensive clothes, and basically anything she wanted. I learned early that asking for things would result in lectures about being grateful for what I had. Delilah was always the star of the family. When she brought home mediocre grades, my parents celebrated. When I brought home excellent grades, they barely acknowledged it. During family gatherings, they would spend the entire time bragging about Delilah's latest achievements while I sat there listening. When relatives asked about me, my parents would give short answers before steering the conversation back to Delilah. The pattern became obvious during high school. Delilah joined the cheerleading team, and my parents never missed a game or competition. They bought her expensive uniforms and paid for private coaching. When I joined the robotics club and we qualified for state championships, they said they were too busy with the catering business to attend. I took the bus to the competition by myself and watched other kids celebrate with their families afterward. Money was never really tight in our house, but my parents acted like spending anything on me was a burden. When I needed new clothes, we went to thrift stores. When Delilah needed new clothes, we went to the mall. My parents justified this by saying Delilah was more social and needed to look good for her friends. I wore the same 3 pairs of jeans throughout my junior and senior years. The scholarship news came during my senior year. I had been working toward this for 4 years. The engineering program was highly competitive, and the full scholarship covered tuition, room, board, and even provided a small stipend for expenses. When I got the acceptance letter, I ran home to tell my parents. They were in the kitchen going over catering orders when I burst in with the news. My mother looked up from her paperwork and nodded. My father said congratulations and went back to his calculations. That was it. No celebration, no phone calls to relatives, no proud social media posts. Delilah got more excitement when she made junior varsity cheerleading. 2 weeks later, my parents called me into the living room for what they called a family meeting. Delilah was there too, sitting on the couch with a smug expression. My parents had been talking, and they had decided that I should decline the scholarship and attend the local community college instead. They wanted me to take out loans for community college and give the scholarship money to Delilah so she could attend her dream school, a private liberal arts college that cost $60,000 per year. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. My mother explained that Delilah had always been the creative one in the family, and she deserved the chance to study art and literature at a prestigious school. My father added that I was smart enough to succeed anywhere, so it didn't matter where I went to college. They had already looked into transferring the scholarship, and while it wasn't possible, they expected me to decline it and take out private loans to help pay for Delilah's education. I told them no. The scholarship was awarded to me based on my grades and achievements. I had worked for 4 years to earn it, and I wasn't giving it up. My mother's face hardened, and she started talking about family loyalty and sacrifice. My father said I was being selfish and ungrateful after everything they had done for me. The argument escalated quickly. I pointed out that they had spent thousands of dollars on Delilah's activities over the years while spending almost nothing on me. I mentioned the missed robotics competitions, the thrift store clothes, and the countless times they had prioritized Delilah's wants over my needs. My mother denied any favoritism, claiming they had always treated us equally. My father said I was imagining things and being dramatic. Delilah finally spoke up, saying she couldn't believe I was being so mean to our parents. She said they had sacrificed so much for both of us, and the least I could do was help her get into a good college. She cried and said I obviously didn't care about her future. My parents comforted her while glaring at me. The conversation went in circles for over an hour. My parents kept insisting that family comes first, and I kept explaining that I had earned the scholarship through my own hard work. They accused me of being selfish, greedy, and ungrateful. I accused them of playing favorites my entire life. Nothing was resolved. Over the next few weeks, the pressure intensified. My parents brought up the scholarship at dinner, during car rides, and whenever we were alone together. They enlisted my grandmother to call and guilt-trip me about helping my sister. They had Delilah's friends' parents reach out to talk about how important college was for young women. The whole extended family seemed to know about our situation, and I received multiple calls and texts about being a good brother. My grades started slipping because I couldn't concentrate at school. I was exhausted from defending my decision every single day. My parents made comments about how disappointed they were in me, how they had raised me better than this, and how Delilah deserved better from her brother. The house became hostile territory. 3 months before graduation, my parents delivered their ultimatum. I could either decline the scholarship and help Delilah, or I could figure out my own living arrangements after I turned 18. They gave me 2 weeks to decide. I spent those 2 weeks researching other options, but there was no way to transfer the scholarship, and declining it would mean losing the opportunity forever. On my 18th birthday, I told my parents I was keeping the scholarship. My father handed me a suitcase and told me to pack my things. My mother said I was no longer welcome in their house if I was going to be so selfish. Delilah sat at the kitchen table eating birthday cake and didn't say goodbye when I left. I spent my last 2 months of high school living with my robotics teacher and his family. They were kind enough to take me in when I explained the situation. I graduated as valedictorian, but my parents didn't attend the ceremony. Delilah posted pictures of herself at prom on social media the same day, and my parents commented about how proud they were of their beautiful daughter. College became my escape. The engineering program was challenging, but I threw myself into my studies and made friends with other students who shared my interests. I worked part-time jobs during breaks and summers, saving money and building my resume. I blocked my parents' phone numbers after they called several times during my freshman year asking if I had changed my mind about helping Delilah. For 5 years, I built a life without them. I graduated with honors, got hired by a tech company with an excellent starting salary, and moved into my own apartment. I heard occasional updates from my grandmother, who remained neutral in the family drama. Delilah had transferred from her expensive private school to a state university after 2 years because my parents couldn't afford the tuition. She changed majors 3 times and graduated with a degree in communications. My parents' catering business struggled during the pandemic, and they had to lay off most of their employees. Last month, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. It was my mother. She was crying and apologizing for everything that had happened 5 years ago. She said they had made mistakes and treated me unfairly. She admitted they had favored Delilah and said they realized how wrong they had been. She asked if we could meet for dinner to repair our relationship. Then she mentioned that they were facing foreclosure on their house. The catering business was failing, and they had maxed out their credit cards trying to keep it afloat. Delilah was living at home again because she couldn't find a job that paid enough for her to afford her own place. My mother asked if I could help them financially, just until they got back on their feet. I listened to her entire speech without interrupting. When she finished, I told her I wasn't interested in resuming our relationship or providing financial assistance. I hung up and blocked the new number. 2 days later, my cousin Jake called. He said my parents had been reaching out to everyone in the extended family, telling them I was being cruel and vindictive. They claimed I was punishing them for old disagreements and refusing to help my struggling family. Several relatives had already called him asking why I was being so heartless. I realized this was the same pattern from 5 years ago. When I didn't do what my parents wanted, they recruited others to pressure me. The difference now is that I'm financially independent and don't need their approval. I told Jake the truth about what happened, and he understood why I wasn't interested in helping. But I'm wondering if I should respond to the family pressure or just ignore it completely. My parents are spreading their version of events, and some relatives who don't know the full story are starting to believe I'm the villain in this situation. Should I reach out to explain my side, or should I just let them think whatever they want? I don't need these people in my life, but I also don't like being painted as the bad guy when I'm not the one who created this mess. Update 1: The situation with my family has gotten worse since my original post. I took the advice from many commenters and decided to ignore the family pressure rather than engage with it. That strategy worked for about a week. Last Friday evening, my doorbell rang around 7 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I looked through the peephole and saw my father standing on my doorstep. He was alone, wearing a wrinkled shirt and jeans, which was unusual because he always dressed professionally for his catering business. I hadn't seen him in 5 years, and he looked older and thinner than I remembered. I didn't open the door immediately. We stared at each other through the peephole for about 30 seconds before he started knocking again. He called my name and said he just wanted to talk. I finally opened the door but didn't invite him inside. He started by saying he was sorry for showing up unannounced, but I hadn't been answering their calls. I reminded him that I had blocked their numbers. He nodded and said he understood why I was angry, but he hoped we could work things out as adults. My father looked around my apartment complex and commented on how nice it was. He asked about my job and seemed genuinely interested in hearing about my work at the tech company. For a few minutes, it almost felt like a normal conversation between a father and son. Then he shifted to the real reason for his visit. He told me that my mother had been struggling with depression since their business started failing. She blamed herself for the problems with Delilah and with me. He said they had both realized they made serious mistakes in how they treated me, and they wanted to make amends. He asked if I would consider having dinner with them, just to hear them out. I told him I wasn't interested in family dinners or reconciliation attempts. He nodded like he expected that answer, but then he pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was Delilah, and she looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, she had dark circles under her eyes, and she was much thinner than when I last saw her. He said she had been having panic attacks and hadn't left the house in weeks. My father explained that Delilah felt responsible for destroying our family. She had told them recently that she knew they favored her growing up, and she regretted not standing up for me when I left. He said she wanted to apologize but was too ashamed to contact me directly. He asked if I would at least talk to her, not for my parents' sake, but for hers. I stood there looking at the photo, and my father must have thought he was making progress because he kept talking. He said Delilah had been in therapy and was working on understanding how the family dynamics had affected all of us. She had broken up with her longtime boyfriend because she realized she had been repeating the same patterns of manipulation she learned at home. He painted a picture of a young woman who was genuinely trying to change and make amends. Then he mentioned their financial situation again. He said they were 3 months behind on their mortgage, and the bank had started foreclosure proceedings. Their catering business had lost its commercial kitchen lease, and they were operating out of their home kitchen to fulfill the few remaining contracts. My mother had taken a job at a grocery store to help pay bills, but it wasn't enough to catch up on their debts. He didn't directly ask for money, but he made it clear that my success could solve their problems. He mentioned my salary, which meant they had been researching my company and probably my position. He said he was proud of what I had accomplished and that they had been wrong to try to hold me back. But he also implied that family should help family during difficult times. I listened to everything he said, then told him I needed time to think about it. He seemed encouraged by that response and gave me his new phone number since I had blocked the old one. He said he would wait to hear from me and wouldn't pressure me for an answer. Then he hugged me, which caught me off guard, and left. I spent the weekend thinking about the conversation. Part of me wondered if my parents had genuinely changed and if Delilah was really struggling with guilt over our family situation. But I also remembered how manipulative my parents could be, and I questioned whether this was another attempt to get money from me. On Sunday, I called my cousin Jake to get his perspective. He had stayed in touch with my parents over the years and had a better sense of their current situation. Jake confirmed that their business was failing and that they were facing foreclosure. He also said Delilah had been having mental health issues, but he wasn't sure if it was related to guilt over our family problems or just the stress of being unemployed and living with struggling parents. Jake told me something interesting that my father hadn't mentioned. Delilah had been in a relationship with a guy named Tyler for 3 years, and they had been talking about getting engaged. But she broke up with him suddenly about 2 months ago, right around the time my mother first called me. Jake thought the timing was suspicious and wondered if my parents had pressured Delilah to end the relationship so she would be more available to help with their financial problems. This information made me reconsider everything my father had told me. If Delilah broke up with her boyfriend around the same time my parents started reaching out to me, it suggested their approach was more calculated than spontaneous. It also made me wonder if Delilah's mental health issues were really about guilt over our childhood or about being manipulated by our parents in the present. I decided to do some research before making any decisions. I looked up my parents' business online and found several negative reviews from recent months. Customers complained about late deliveries, poor food quality, and unprofessional service. Their social media pages hadn't been updated in months, and their website looked outdated and unprofessional. I also checked public records and confirmed that their house was indeed in foreclosure proceedings. They had taken out a second mortgage 2 years ago, probably to fund the business during the pandemic, and they had fallen behind on payments. The house was scheduled for auction in 6 weeks unless they could catch up on their debts. On Monday evening, my phone rang from another unfamiliar number. This time it was Delilah. Her voice was shaky, and she sounded like she had been crying. She said she knew our father had visited me, and she wanted to explain things from her perspective. Delilah told me she had been thinking about our childhood a lot lately, and she realized how unfairly I had been treated. She said she was old enough now to understand that our parents' favoritism had been wrong, and she felt terrible about benefiting from it. She apologized for not defending me when I left and for not reaching out sooner. She also told me about her relationship with Tyler. She said our parents had been pressuring her to ask him for money to help with their financial problems. Tyler's family was wealthy, and my parents thought Delilah could convince him to invest in their catering business or at least lend them money to save the house. Delilah said she couldn't bring herself to use her relationship that way, so she ended it instead. The conversation lasted almost an hour. Delilah seemed genuinely remorseful about the past, and I found myself believing that her regret was sincere. But I also noticed that she carefully avoided asking me for money directly. Instead, she focused on our relationship and how much she missed having a brother. She said she understood if I couldn't forgive our parents, but she hoped we could rebuild our sibling relationship. By the end of the call, I was more confused than ever. Delilah sounded different than I remembered, more mature and self-aware. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that this was part of a coordinated effort by my parents to manipulate me into helping them financially. I told Delilah I needed time to process everything, and she said she understood. She gave me her phone number and said I could call her anytime if I wanted to talk more. She also said she would respect my decision if I chose not to have contact with the family. Now I'm not sure what to do. My parents are clearly in financial trouble, and Delilah does seem to be struggling. But I also remember how they treated me for 18 years, and I don't trust their motives. I'm torn between my instinct to help people in need and my knowledge of how manipulative my family can be. Update 2: I have an update that changes everything I wrote in my previous posts. It turns out my instincts about my family's manipulation were correct, but the situation was even worse than I thought. After my last update, I decided to take a middle approach with my family. I wasn't ready to provide financial help or fully reconcile, but I was willing to maintain limited contact with Delilah to see if she had genuinely changed. I told her I would talk to her once a week, but I wasn't comfortable meeting in person or involving our parents in our conversations yet. Delilah seemed grateful for this compromise, and we had several phone conversations over the next 2 weeks. She told me about her job search, her struggles with anxiety, and her regrets about our childhood. She never directly asked for money, but she often mentioned how stressed our parents were about losing the house. She painted a picture of a family in crisis, with our mother crying constantly and our father working 16-hour days trying to save the business. During one of these calls, Delilah mentioned that she had been staying with her friend Rachel on weekends to get away from the tension at home. This detail stuck with me because Rachel had been Delilah's best friend in high school, and I remembered her being very close to our family. I wondered if Rachel knew the truth about our family situation or if she was getting the same manipulated version that everyone else seemed to hear. Last Thursday, I made a decision that probably saved me from making a huge mistake. I was having lunch near my old high school when I saw Rachel walking out of a coffee shop. I recognized her immediately, even though it had been 5 years since I last saw her. I decided to approach her and ask about Delilah. Rachel was surprised to see me, but she was friendly and seemed genuinely happy about my success. She asked about my job and my life, and I could tell she had heard positive things about me from somewhere. When I mentioned that I had been talking to Delilah recently, Rachel's expression changed. She looked around to make sure no one was listening, then asked if we could sit down for a few minutes. She said she had something important to tell me about Delilah and my parents, but she wasn't sure if she should get involved in family drama. I convinced Rachel that I needed to know the truth, especially if Delilah was really struggling with mental health issues. Rachel took a deep breath and told me that Delilah had been lying about almost everything in our recent conversations. According to Rachel, Delilah wasn't staying at her house on weekends. In fact, Rachel hadn't seen Delilah in over a month, and when they last spoke, Delilah seemed fine. She wasn't having panic attacks or struggling with anxiety. She had a part-time job at a boutique clothing store and was actually planning to move in with a new boyfriend she had been dating for several weeks. Rachel also told me that Delilah's breakup with Tyler wasn't about refusing to ask him for money. Delilah had cheated on Tyler with her new boyfriend, and Tyler found out through social media. The breakup was messy and public, and Delilah had been bragging to friends about how much better her new relationship was. But the most shocking revelation was about my parents' business. Rachel's mother had worked for a catering company that competed with my parents, and she had inside information about their situation. My parents hadn't been struggling to save a failing business. They had deliberately run the business into the ground by taking out loans and credit lines, then transferring the money to personal accounts before declaring bankruptcy. Rachel explained that my parents had been planning this for over a year. They knew the pandemic had damaged their reputation and client base, so they decided to extract as much money as possible from the business before it collapsed completely. They had been living off the borrowed money while making minimal payments on their business and personal debts. The foreclosure on their house was real, but it was part of their strategy. They planned to declare personal bankruptcy after losing the house, which would eliminate most of their debts. They had already moved valuable items to storage units and transferred money to accounts that wouldn't be affected by the bankruptcy. Rachel said her mother had considered reporting my parents for fraud, but their lawyer said it would be difficult to prove and probably not worth the effort since the business was small. I sat there listening to this information, trying to process how calculated and dishonest my parents had been. But Rachel wasn't finished. She told me that Delilah had been bragging to friends about how she was going to convince me to give the family money. Delilah had told people that our parents' apologies and sob stories were just part of the plan to manipulate me. According to Rachel, Delilah had bet her friends that she could get at least $50,000 from me by playing the role of a reformed, guilt-ridden sister. She had been studying my social media accounts and researching my company to figure out how much money I probably had. She even practiced her apology speech with friends before calling me. Rachel showed me screenshots of text messages between her and Delilah from several weeks ago. In the messages, Delilah laughed about how gullible I was and how easy it had been to make me feel sorry for her. She mocked the things I had told her about my life and made jokes about how desperate I sounded for family approval. The messages were brutal to read. Delilah referred to me as her stupid brother and said I deserved everything that happened to me as a kid because I was weird and antisocial. She said our parents were right to favor her because she was obviously the better child, and now she was going to prove it by getting money out of me. I asked Rachel why she was showing me this information. She said she had been uncomfortable with Delilah's plan from the beginning, but she didn't know how to contact me or if I would believe her. When she saw me at the coffee shop, she decided it was a sign that she should tell me the truth. Rachel also mentioned that other people in town knew about my parents' plan. They had been talking openly about manipulating me, apparently confident that I would never find out. Several family friends had been recruited to call me and vouch for my parents' changed attitudes, and they were all aware that it was a coordinated deception. I thanked Rachel for telling me the truth and asked her to send me copies of the text messages. She agreed and said she hoped I would cut contact with my family completely. She said they had been toxic people for as long as she had known them, and they didn't deserve my success or my compassion. I drove home in a daze, trying to understand how my family could be so calculating and cruel. I had suspected they were being manipulative, but I hadn't imagined they were running an elaborate con game designed to defraud me. That evening, Delilah called for our weekly conversation. I let her go through her usual routine of talking about her anxiety, her job search, and her concern for our parents. She even cried while describing how guilty she felt about our childhood and how much she wanted to repair our relationship. I listened to the entire performance without interrupting her. When she finished, I told her that I had spoken to Rachel and knew the truth about everything. The silence on the other end of the line lasted for almost a minute. When Delilah finally spoke, her voice was completely different. The shaky, apologetic tone was gone, replaced by anger and defensiveness. She accused Rachel of lying and said she was just jealous of our family's success. When I mentioned the text messages, Delilah became even more hostile. She said I was an idiot if I believed Rachel over my own sister. She claimed the messages were taken out of context and that Rachel had manipulated them to make her look bad. She said I was paranoid and bitter, and that I was looking for excuses to abandon my family when they needed me most. I let her rant for a few minutes, then told her I was blocking her number and wouldn't be having any more contact with her or our parents. She started screaming at me, calling me selfish and ungrateful. She said I would regret cutting off my family, and that I would end up alone and miserable. The last thing she said was that I had always been the problem in our family, and that our parents were right to favor her because she was a better person than I would ever be. Then she hung up. I blocked Delilah's number and spent the evening changing my contact information and social media settings to prevent my parents from finding new ways to reach me. I also sent a message to my cousin Jake explaining what I had learned and asking him not to share any information about me with my parents or Delilah. Jake responded immediately, saying he wasn't surprised by the revelation. He said he had always found my parents manipulative, but he hadn't realized they were capable of such an elaborate deception. He promised to keep my contact information private and said he supported my decision to cut them off completely. The next morning, I received a long email from my father. Somehow he had gotten my work email address, probably through online research or by calling my company. The email was full of desperate pleas and accusations. He denied everything Rachel had told me and claimed she was lying to break up our family. He said Delilah was devastated by my accusations and that my mother was having a breakdown. He also threatened to show up at my workplace if I didn't respond to his attempts to contact me. He said he wouldn't let me destroy our family based on lies and gossip. The email was rambling and incoherent, and it made me realize how unhinged my parents had become in their desperation. I forwarded the email to HR at my company and explained that I was dealing with family harassment. They assured me that they would handle any attempts by my parents to contact me at work, and they offered to help me get a restraining order if necessary. I haven't heard from my parents or Delilah since then, but I'm not naive enough to think this is over. They invested too much time and effort in their manipulation plan to give up easily. I'm prepared for them to escalate their harassment or try to turn other family members against me. But for the first time in months, I feel clear about my decision. There's no ambiguity or guilt about cutting off contact with people who were willing to orchestrate such an elaborate deception to steal money from me. They showed me exactly who they are, and I believe them. Update 3: This will be my final update on the situation with my family. What happened over the past 6 weeks has convinced me that I made the right decision to cut all contact with them. After I blocked Delilah's number and stopped responding to my father's emails, my parents tried several new tactics to force me back into contact. The first escalation happened about 2 weeks after my last update. My parents recruited my grandmother to call me. She used her own phone and also borrowed phones from other relatives to get around my blocking. In these calls, she told me that my mother had been hospitalized for a mental breakdown and that my father was drinking heavily and talking about suicide. She said the family was falling apart because of my stubbornness, and she begged me to at least talk to my parents one more time. I almost believed her until I called the local hospital directly and asked if my mother was a patient there. They couldn't give me specific information, but they could confirm whether someone by that name was currently admitted. My mother wasn't in the hospital, and she never had been. When I confronted my grandmother about the lie, she admitted that my parents had asked her to exaggerate their condition to get my attention. She said she didn't approve of lying, but she thought it was important for families to stick together during difficult times. I told her I was disappointed in her willingness to participate in their manipulation, and I asked her not to contact me again about this situation. The next tactic was more disturbing. My parents somehow got the contact information from my supervisor at work and called him directly. They told him I was having a family emergency and needed to speak with him urgently. They claimed I had blocked their numbers during a mental health crisis, and they were worried about my safety. My supervisor was professional about the situation, but he pulled me aside the next day to ask if everything was okay at home. I explained that my parents were harassing me and that any future calls from them should be ignored. HR documented the incident and sent a formal letter to my parents warning them against contacting my workplace again. 2 days later, my parents showed up at my apartment complex. I saw them through my window, walking around the parking lot and knocking on doors, apparently trying to figure out which unit was mine. I called the complex security office, and they asked my parents to leave the property. My parents argued with security and claimed they had a right to see their son, but they eventually left when threatened with police involvement. I decided to take more serious action after the apartment incident. I consulted with a lawyer about getting a restraining order, and he said I had enough documentation to make a strong case. The pattern of workplace harassment, lying to family members, and showing up at my home demonstrated that my parents were escalating their behavior in ways that could become dangerous. Before I could file the restraining order paperwork, something unexpected happened that resolved the situation more definitively than any legal action could have. My cousin Jake called me with news that my parents had been arrested. Apparently, their scheme to defraud their catering business had attracted attention from investigators. Several creditors had complained about suspicious transfers of money and assets before the business bankruptcy, and the state attorney's office had launched an investigation. Jake explained that my parents had made the mistake of bragging about their plan to too many people. The same neighbors and family friends they had recruited to pressure me into giving them money had eventually talked to investigators. Some of these people felt guilty about participating in the manipulation scheme and decided to cooperate with authorities. The charges against my parents included business fraud, bankruptcy fraud, and tax evasion. They had not only stolen money from their business before declaring bankruptcy, but they had also failed to report income from their cash catering jobs over the past 2 years. The amount of money involved was significant enough to make this a felony case. Delilah was also facing charges as an accessory because she had helped move money and assets to hide them from creditors. Investigators discovered that the storage units containing my parents' valuable items were rented under Delilah's name, and she had signed documents transferring ownership of assets to her right before the bankruptcy filing. Jake said the arrests had caused a huge scandal in our hometown. My parents' mugshots were published in the local newspaper along with details about the fraud charges. Several other business owners came forward with stories about my parents' unethical practices over the years, painting a picture of people who had been dishonest long before their recent financial troubles. The revelation that my parents were criminals helped me understand why they had been so desperate to get money from me. They weren't just facing normal financial difficulties, they were trying to fund their lifestyle while avoiding the consequences of their illegal activities. My scholarship money and my current salary represented a way for them to maintain their standard of living without having to work legitimately. It also explained why Delilah had been so confident about manipulating me. She wasn't just trying to help struggling parents, she was participating in an ongoing criminal enterprise. Her performance as a reformed, guilt-ridden sister was just another con game in a long series of fraudulent activities. The criminal charges effectively ended my parents' harassment campaign. They were too busy dealing with lawyers and court dates to focus on manipulating me. Their phones were probably tapped, and they couldn't risk making contact with me in ways that might be seen as witness intimidation or harassment. I learned from Jake that my parents had tried to blame me for their legal troubles. They told anyone who would listen that their financial problems started when I refused to help them, and that I had driven them to desperate measures by abandoning my family. Some people actually believed this narrative, which shows how manipulative my parents could be even when facing criminal charges. But most people in town understood that my parents' problems were caused by their own dishonest choices, not by my refusal to fund their lifestyle. The timeline of their criminal activities made it clear that they had been planning fraud long before they reached out to me for money. 3 weeks ago, my parents pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for shorter prison sentences. My father got 2 years in state prison, and my mother got 18 months. Delilah pleaded guilty to accessory charges and received 2 years of probation plus community service. The house that was supposedly facing foreclosure was seized by the state as part of the criminal case. It will be sold at auction, and the proceeds will go toward paying back the creditors my parents defrauded. Delilah moved in with her new boyfriend after the house was seized. I felt a strange sense of relief when I heard about the guilty pleas. For months, I had been questioning whether I was being too harsh by cutting off contact with my family. The criminal charges confirmed that my instincts about their character had been correct. They weren't just manipulative or selfish, they were actually criminals who had been willing to break the law to avoid taking responsibility for their choices. Several family members reached out to apologize for pressuring me to reconcile with my parents. They said they had been manipulated just like I was, and they felt terrible about participating in the harassment campaign. I appreciated their apologies, but I also made it clear that I didn't want to discuss my parents or Delilah with anyone in the extended family. My grandmother called one last time to say she was sorry for lying to me about my mother's hospitalization. She said she should have known better than to trust my parents' version of events. I forgave her because I understood that she had been manipulated too, but I asked her to respect my privacy and not share information about my life with other family members. The whole experience has been educational, even though it was unpleasant. I learned that my childhood memories of favoritism and neglect were not exaggerated or imagined. My parents really were the selfish, manipulative people I remembered, and they had gotten worse with age rather than better. I also learned that cutting toxic people out of your life, even family members, can be the healthiest choice you can make. I spent 5 years building a successful, independent life without my parents' involvement, and I was happier than I had ever been. Their attempt to manipulate their way back into my life would have destroyed my peace and probably my financial security. Now that my parents are in prison and Delilah is focused on her own legal troubles, I can finally close this chapter of my life completely. I don't expect to hear from any of them again, and I'm perfectly fine with that outcome. Some people might think I'm cold for not feeling sad about my parents going to prison, but I honestly feel nothing but relief. They made their choices, and now they're facing the consequences. I tried to build a relationship with them when I was younger, and they chose to prioritize Delilah and their own interests instead. The criminal investigation revealed that my parents had been planning their fraud scheme for over 2 years, which means they were already breaking the law when they first contacted me asking for money. They weren't desperate people making poor decisions under pressure, they were calculating criminals who saw me as another potential victim. I'm sharing this final update because I want other people in similar situations to understand that trusting your instincts about manipulative family members is important. When people show you who they are through their actions, believe them. Don't let guilt or family loyalty convince you to ignore red flags or excuse harmful behavior. My life is better now than it was before any of this started. I have a good job, financial security, and relationships with people who respect me and treat me well. I don't need approval or love from people who only see me as a source of money or convenience. The scholarship I fought to keep 5 years ago was the best decision I ever made. It gave me the education and opportunities that allowed me to build an independent life. If I had given in to my parents' demands back then, I would probably be struggling financially now and still dealing with their manipulation and criminal behavior. I won't be posting any more updates about this situation. My parents will be in prison for the next year or two, and Delilah will be dealing with probation and community service. I doubt any of them will try to contact me again, but if they do, I'll handle it the same way I handled their recent harassment campaign. For anyone dealing with similar family situations, my advice is to prioritize your own well-being and future over family expectations. You don't owe anyone your success just because you share DNA with them. Sometimes the best thing you can do for toxic family members is to remove yourself from their lives so they can't use you as an excuse to avoid taking responsibility for their own choices. That's my final word on this situation. I'm moving on with my life, and I'm grateful that I learned the truth about my family before I made the mistake of trusting them again.